College football nerds here talking Utah and Texas. We are running on fumes. It is super late, which unfortunately means we don't have a whole lot of time to talk about this one, but we wanted to get into the model real quick. And unlike other times, sometimes where we just do the model and leave the data out, we're going to do the model, talk about the numbers, and then both of us are going to give a prediction on this and maybe a few notes at the end. So Josh, why don't you get us into the numbers?
Right, and we did most all the ranked on ranked matchups. We didn't do just a couple, but we decided to do this one even though it wasn't ranked on ranked because we just thought Utah and Texas was one of the more interesting bowls this season. That and then almost, if you look at it, actually almost every ranked on ranked matchup in the bowl season are all SEC teams. We kind of wanted to do one that wasn't just SEC. Our model is a per play model. And it looks at how you do against your opponents. It looks at how your opponents did against everybody else and gets a comparative idea of how strong you are comparatively or relationally compared to the rest of your teams in your conference. Then we build a profile for your team, your strengths and weaknesses. We look at the matchup versus your opponent, and then we sort of generate a production expectation. Based on that production expectation, we have to generate a score. And the way we do it is we let the model figure out how you score. We look at your past history in games. And it's not just like points per yard on a straight line. I mean, it's actually doing a multivariate analysis and saying, okay, these are the factors that have most closely equated to scoring, and this is how you've scored in different situations. And it looks at your production, kind of plugs it into that equation it's generated, that produces your score. The idea to get the most neutral, objective B+ versus, if you play your B+, they play your B+, what's the game look like idea possible. And the model kind of gives you your baseline. This should be your baseline expectation for what the game should look like. If the conferences are equal, other stuff. Well, let's talk briefly about the conference issue after we've discussed the model. So this is kind of the tale of two teams, okay? So Utah, one of the first stats that we generate is an intermediary stat, is percentage of opponent averages allowed. So if your opponent's average 4 yards per carry, you've allowed 3, you allow 75% of their averages. Neutral statistic, you're adjusting purely for quality of your opponents in a relational sense. So Utah allows 69% of opponent rush averages, 78% of opponent passing averages. That's an elite number in rush defense. I mean, you can get a below 65, and some teams have, but that's very, very, very good. 78% of opponent passing averages is also, I would think anything getting around 75% I call elite. It's a lot harder to hold teams below their passing averages than the run averages. Passing carries, that's why elite passing offenses can tear it up in the playoffs, and why your zone read run offenses in the playoffs and the BCS games have sometimes been shut down. The run is a lot easier to shut down than the pass. It's very clear statistically. Texas allows 93% of opponent rushing averages and 101% of opponent passing averages. It's an average, very average run D and a bad pass D. And I say bad because everybody plays some G5 teams. Everybody plays some bad teams. Those bad teams you play, your Washington States, they played some crappy teams out of conference that boosted their numbers a little bit, so everybody's a little bit inflated. So if you're allowing their average, you're kind of also getting compared to those G5 teams. It's not a good thing. Now, we've been very heavily defensive of Texas. We understand their injury situation. There's a very good reason why they are where they are. This would have been a very different team, and we had them, very high. We ended on our top 10 early in the year, and the injuries mounted until they just could not stay up there anymore. But that is what it is. I mean, that is where these two teams are. Now, offensively and defensively, Utah has the edge, 4.7 yards per carry, 10 yards per attempt. Texas is at 4.66 and 7.9. I don't think many people realize Utah's at 10.1 yards per attempt, that they have been that effective in the pass game, and they are run heavy, almost 2-to-1. 364 carries to 235, just looking at the first 3 quarters. But still, I mean, they throw the ball well. And so it gives a pretty significant advantage to Utah in yard per play, 6.7 yards per play to 4.7. The interesting thing is, as much as Utah has a really significant per play average advantage, and I want to emphasize, we say usually like 4 yard per carry, 6.5 yard per attempt is your mark for competency. Texas doesn't hit either number here, where they're expected to be 3.2 yards per carry, 6.1 yards per attempt, not competent on either side of the ball. And Utah is hitting competency plus, 4.5 yards per carry, 10.2 yards per attempt, really effective offensively. And yet it's a 33-24 score prediction. And so the reason why it's 33-24 is pretty simple. Utah has had some games where they had really good production and they didn't score a lot of points. When Utah played Arizona, 7 yards per play is a lot, and they scored 35. When they played, Cal, they were at 6.6. They scored 35. And then really early in the season, when they were in that game against Washington State, 7.4 yards per play is a ton of yardage, 38 points. So it's pretty clear that Utah is often scoring in the 30s despite having very good offensive output, whereas most teams can find a way to score 20, and that's kind of what you're looking at with Texas at 24. A solid outing where they're kind of struggling, whereas Utah hits 33, but it's 9 point or a 9-point differential, but in a game where Utah is expected to be a lot more effective to get that 9-point differential.
And the problem with this is we've got a combined 0-5 against these two conferences and Power 5 teams with a winning record. It's kind of frustrating that these two teams, these two conferences have only played 5 Power 5 teams with a winning record, but that's what we've got. And that's where the model chokes. I mean, we've seen this as a recurring theme where it's hard to feed a system such disparate data. And for me, it's tough because the Pac-12 in particular, they just struggled this year. And I will say they improved a lot on last year and separated themselves from the ACC, where I had some concerns. And I think Utah, the last perception we have of Utah is that they got run by Oregon, but they're still favored, and they're still favored by a decent number. But the problem is they're playing a 7-5 team. I don't think that Utah is equipped to blow Texas out. And OddsShark's predicted score, like the mass of people that feed this data, OddsShark's predicted score is 44-23. I don't see that. I don't know that Texas can be in this game if it's not somewhat high scoring. I know that sounds weird, but I think they need points to be in the game. I'm going to go ahead and give my score on this. I actually like Texas. And I usually go on numbers. We've talked about how we're numbers driven on this channel. I was very high, took a lot of heat for being super high on Utah. I think Texas is a little bit in disarray right now, but they also have a couple of really key pieces that gave Utah some trouble against Oregon and USC. I think they're better at quarterback than Utah's seen a whole lot of this year. I don't think they're great defensively. The problem is the matchup. Utah's not really equipped to take advantage of an ineffective defense. Give me 31-28, Texas. Tell me what you got.
I mean, as you said, the problem with this is the Pac-12 was 0-3 against Power 5 teams with a winning record. The Big 12 was 0-2. And the biggest key, I don't even really care about the wins and losses because some of it was who played whom. And, Texas having a close game against LSU is not necessarily a knock. The problem is just the lack of games, the number of games. You've got, between the two conferences, 22 teams, okay? And you ended up with 5 games out of conference against Power 5 teams with a winning record. Less than 1 in 4 teams played a Power 5 team with a winning record out of conference. And our model is trying to compare the Pac-12 and the Big 12, and it just has no clue how to equate them. Because you got that one, your two, like, when you get talk out of conference data points, UCLA and Oklahoma. UCLA sucked. And they sucked in the Pac-12 until the end of the year but they sucked early in the year against everybody, just like they sucked against Oklahoma. So how do you make anything from it? I don't know that you can. But I will say this, and this is kind of my view on it. I'm going to pick Utah. I'm going to say Utah 34-24. And that same OddsShark data, which is kind of fun for us because we don't actually usually get to see the odds stuff because we do these videos on Sunday and the lines are just now coming out and people haven't started to put money on the lines yet. Most people, it's like 53% are on Texas. And the 7-point line seems about even. It's even money on either side at least. I think it's interesting there's even money because I don't think Vegas has any confidence either when you're comparing these two conferences. My hinge point is there's a certain point where when you're an offense like Utah, things work, and then there's a certain point when they don't. They're very physical. They're a run-first team. I mean, they can throw the ball, okay? It's not like they're incompetent again. 10.1 yards per attempt. Huntley is a good quarterback, but when they hit certain thresholds, they take off, and they are effective. And I think they're able to hit that threshold against Texas. They got shut down against Oregon because they couldn't hit 5 yards per play. And against Arizona State, they're at 5.1 yards per play, and they only scored 21 points. I think they operate in an effective, it's saying 6.7 yards per play, and I think it's right. I think they operate in an effective range. The offense does operate well. It's still going to be a grinded out kind of game. I'm saying 34-24. I think it just really comes down to the fact that Utah gets enough production for their offense to function well. Texas hit some big plays with their big targets downfield, but this is still a massively injury-ridden Texas. I don't think they're going to handle the physicality of Utah because Utah is a very physical team. And I think at the end of the day, the Texas that started the season, the Texas that's wholly healthy, wins this game. But we're never going to know what that Texas would have looked like. And it's unfortunate. And I just don't think they're going to be able to pull it out given the injury situation. And that lack of depth against a very physical team is going to be pretty brutal.
I will say, and one thing in Utah's defense that people may not know because they haven't watched a lot of Pac-12 football, Oregon has a very good defense. Oregon has a really underrated defense. We all know Oregon of old that really won games by put a ton of points on the board. That's not this Oregon team. Their defense is super underrated. And I think it's a brand name thing. And I think this is the other problem with the Pac-12 is there is good football played in the Pac-12, and they have a horrible marketing problem. They have a messaging problem, and yes, they have a time zone problem. They've got to do something to get out of that because I actually like watching Pac-12 football. I've liked watching Utah this year. We got to see something better in 2020 and beyond. All right, y'all, that's it for our quick and super late. We're pushing midnight 30 and got to get up at 6, so it's going to be a long one for us tomorrow. But this was worth it. Had to get it out. I think it was a fun one. So let us know in the comments what you think what your score is going to be and why you think that's going to be. Back it up with data. Tell us why we're crazy. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great bowl season. God bless.